So good morning, everybody. Welcome to the history of hypnosis. It's a very fascinating subject to learn the history of hypnosis and NLP. I had so much fun doing this part and I had so much fun actually learning it. When I learnt the history of hypnosis in my hypnosis course, I found it very dull and very boring. And maybe it was just the presenter, or maybe I just wasn't open to it at the time. I mean, hey, that can all happen. But what I decided to do in this course was give some history and dig into it just a tiny bit deeper so that way we can understand some of the concepts and how it actually came about. So here we go. So it's a very fascinating subject. The history to learn hypnosis is actually as ancient as sorcery and magic. There are incantations and recitations of words, tones, and physiology that dates back to an unknown source. The scientific history, however, began in the later part of the 18th century with Franz Mesmer. Mesmer was a German physician who used hypnosis as a treatment in his office. However, unfortunately, Mesmer had a mistaken belief that hypnotism made this occultic force, and that's what was known as animal magnetism. And what would happen was the animal magnetism would actually flow through the hypnotist and into the subject. Mesmer was discredited for this. However, the belief and the mesmerism method, actually named mesmerism, actually continues today. It's a technique that we use and we call it mesmerism. And that's how the hand technique came about, because Mesmer was always going, ooh, things like this, because of the animal magnetism and the flow of this so-called magnets that would flow through the hypnotherapist into the subject. Now, when he got discredited, all of a sudden we got left with this whole stigma of mind control. So he was discredited for this, but mesmerism still continues to be used today. In the middle of the 19th century, an English physician named James Braid actually studied the phenomenon, and he named his findings hypnotism and hypnosis. He named them after the Greek god of sleep, Hypnos, even though the client was not actually deemed as asleep. And unfortunately, that was one of the things we got left with today. So Braid was a pioneer of the era, and he established that as much as the client was not deemed as asleep, that people could actually become fixated on an item and they could easily drop in and out of trance. So in the very early days, a swinging watch was used, and it was very popular till it was realized that it actually wasn't necessary. We did not need the swinging watch in order to put people into trance. We just needed them to actually fixate their eyes on an item. It didn't matter where it was or even what it was, as long as they were fixating their eyes and all of their attention on that item before they went into trance. So meanwhile, whilst this was also going on, there was another man named James Esdale, and he recognized how hypnosis could hugely benefit pain management. He really was excited about this idea, and he decided to go out and give it a whirl. He performed hundreds of major operations using only hypnosis instead of anesthetic. He tried to convince the medical board, but unfortunately he was laughed out. This led to hypnosis being categorized as the alternative medicine that it is known as today, and that is where it stays. It's really disappointing that this occurred. However, we had to start somewhere, and as time goes on, we are being more and more recognized. Later in the 1800s, we come across Ambroise, and Ambroise was a French country physician who used mesmeric techniques, and he requested the work of Hippolyte Bernheim. Now, Hippolyte Bernheim was a professor of medicine at Strasbourg, and he had written a book on hypnosis that involved no physical forces. He established that hypnosis needed no physical forces and no psychological processes. It was actually a combination of psychologically mediated responses to suggestion. It was a wonderful breakthrough for our industry, and it still makes it alive today. Then simultaneously, Joseph Bauer began using hypnosis to treat hysteria. Hysteria was horrible at the time in the 1800s, and it was growing, and this is when the depression pills started being made. But what James Brower had worked out, that you could actually treat hysteria, and that's where he discovered repression, where you could actually go back and remember things about the memories. Now, the best part about this history of information, we had a wonderful, wonderful man named Sigmund Freud who recognized the work of Brower, and he recognized all of the work that he was doing with hysteria, and they actually ended up writing a book. Sigmund Freud was an Austrian neurologist, and he was so impressed by the therapeutic potential of hypnosis that he decided that he could absolutely use this. Upon his return from Vienna, he started using hypnosis to help neurotics, and neurotics was a person back then that wasn't suffering from hysteria but was out of control. They always seemed to be in drama and problems and stuff like that. So he decided to start working with those kind of people. What he would do is he would get them to recall the disturbing event and then go back to before the event occurred and then heal the event and find all of the good things that had occurred before then. And he worked out that you could actually go back in time and get the mind to settle back on that previous memory where it was much more happy and where it was much more settled. It was just like rewinding a cassette tape or a video back then, so that way you could actually go back to a better part of the movie of your life. So what he did was he decided that he would put this out there and they would write a book. He began to develop a system called psychoanalysis. However, the problem was that he had difficulties hypnotizing some of his patients, so Freud then abandoned the hypnosis in favor for psychoanalysis. Not sure if this also had something to do with his lisp, so he couldn't actually hypnotize people because they couldn't understand what he was saying. But at the end of the day, hey, who knows? So Freud actually abandoned hypnosis in favor for psychoanalysis because it was an easier way for him to get the results. Now, as we go through the years, psychoanalysts have actually come to view hypnosis as merely a supplement to add to the requirements of psychology as necessary. There are many, many psychologists out there that actually use NLP and hypnosis techniques, all within their psychoanalysis techniques. So this rejection unfortunately led to a massive delay in the development of hypnosis and its practices. It was very, very disappointing for the industry, but at the end of the day, hey, it still got us started. As we fast forward a little bit of time, we begin to discover the work of a Frenchman named Emil Kuh, and he is best known for his auto-suggestion, day by day, in every way I am getting better and better. Kuh believed that he did not actually heal people himself. Rather, he facilitated the self-healing. And this is where the statement occurs that all hypnosis is self-hypnosis. There is no such thing as hypnosis. There is only self-hypnosis. The most famous idea was that the power of imagination would work over the power of willpower. Imagination has more power than will itself. Many people will themselves to do something, yet if they can imagine themselves in the future actually achieving that outcome, then the willpower will grow. So therefore the willpower was a byproduct of the imagination. He demonstrated this by saying to people, I'm going to place a plank of wood on the floor, and as people would walk across the piece of wood, they could do it no worries without wobbling at all. However, if you ask someone to participate in the same exercise, but this time they were to close their eyes, they were to imagine the plank of wood was suspended hundreds of meters above the ground between two buildings. And even though all they were doing was standing on the plank of wood, they would actually begin to wobble and freak out. They'd begin to panic. And that's how he worked out that the power of imagination was more powerful than willpower alone. Kuh also anticipated what was known as the placebo effect at the time. Now, there had been heaps and heaps of studies done on the placebo effect, but he was the one that actually started expressing the interest on it, sort of thing. So Kuh suggested that patients could be given a drug that would cure them, even though the drug had no effect on that person at all. It was all about the power of imagination and belief. And usually when they were given a placebo, it was just a sugar pill. So the placebo effect has been studied and documented throughout the centuries, and it's been proven to work in some cases. Now, the more recognized father figure of hypnosis is Milton H Erickson. He is a highly effective psychotherapist. And as a teenager, he was struck down with polio and paralysis. So during this time, he became fascinated by what people said, and what they did was usually the opposite. And he was also the person that devised the saying, "If I want to know the truth, I will not listen to the sounds of your words. I will focus on your actions." What a wonderful affirmation. Honestly, if you want to know the truth, don't listen to the words that are coming out of people's mouths. So whilst he was down with polio and paralysis, he actually developed countless ways in order to heal people through metaphors, surprise, confusion, shock techniques, and even humor. So he was also known as the master of indirect suggestion. He was able to put a person into trance without even the mention of a word of hypnosis. He was absolutely the founding father of our industry, and if you ever get the chance to read some books on him, he is a fascinating man. He once told a story about how a neighbor of his lost their horse, and the neighbor came to him and said, "Look, is there any way we could do hypnosis so I could find my horse?" And Milton Erickson actually turned around and he said, "Yes, what we will do is we will wait 2 days for the hypnosis has already begun." Anyway, after some time, the actual horse returned home, and the neighbor came along and he's like, "What happened here? Like, the horse has returned home. This is a wonderful thing." And Milton actually said to his neighbor, "The horse always knew where it would be fed, so it would always eventually go home." And that was such one of those wonderful affirmations that he used on the neighbor in order to get him to relax and understand that the horse would go to its home wherever it was fed. And as we go on further a little bit in time, we come across Dave Ullman. He comes onto the scene in 1949 to 1962, and he decided to step up for the industry and teach doctors and dentists hypnosis to help clients. He mostly focused on dentists because of the fears and phobias that many people had with dentists at the time. So he eventually led to teaching hundreds of people how to actually use hypnosis in their everyday lives, and how doctors and dentists could also use hypnosis to help their patients. So over the years, there's been different theories of what hypnosis is and how it might be understood and how it has been presented. There are still no generally accepted explanations for the theory of this wonderful phenomenon. However, as much as hypnosis is not medicine, it works side by side with it and is becoming more and more recognized in the generations. We are so pleased to have this available to us and be part of this wonderful industry. So join me in the next video. I will be talking about the responsibility of the mind and how it actually works. This is NLP, so you will be learning how it is your own brain actually works. And it's not like you got a manual on this when you were first born, so I'll teach you all about the responsibility of the mind.